This morning on The Dish, we head into the kitchen with Tyler Akin, native of Wilmington, Delaware, who's come home after running and opening nationally recognized restaurants in Washington and Philadelphia. He's putting a 21st century twist on a historic landmark, and he's also keeping a table open for another well-known Wilmington native, President-elect Joe Biden. Tyler Akin first stepped foot in the green room at the historic Hotel Dupont as a kid, growing up in Wilmington, Delaware.
This was the restaurant when you're 8 years old that you kind of didn't want to go to because you had to put on a blazer and it was like classical music.
But even then, he could tell it was something special.
The space, especially as a kid, is so vast, you know, and the details so ornate. When I thought about would I ever do a restaurant in Delaware, I always had this dream in my head that it would be this restaurant.
Now, he's the owner and head chef of Le Cavalier at the Green Room, transformed into a French brasserie. What Akin didn't plan for was opening a new restaurant in the middle of a global pandemic, while running 3 more in nearby Philadelphia. 2 of them remain open, but 1 recently closed.
We're all in the same boat as restaurateurs. It's just trying to pivot, adapt, and survive at this point.
He's channeling his concerns about the pandemic into the Independent Restaurants Coalition, a group launched this year to represent the roughly 500,000 independent restaurants nationwide, employing more than 11 million people. The group is led by well-known chefs, including Jose Andres, Tom Colicchio, and Thomas Keller. Some of these guys that you've partnered with are people you've worked with before, competitors, probably people you want to emulate.
You know, some of my heroes are on a Zoom screen in front of me every single day. All of the kind of starstruck aspect of it just melts away really quickly because we're all there to get business done.
And what does Washington need to do to help your industry?
Quite simply, they need to pass the Restaurants Act.
The legislation is passed in the House, but not the Senate. It would provide about $120 billion in federal grants to restaurants, bars, and other food companies that had business dry up nearly overnight once the pandemic struck.
So many restaurants are closing every day and will have closed by the time this thing is finally passed.
What happens to a community when the restaurant closes?
We are entertainment at the end of the day, as much as we are sustenance, and we stand to lose that very important part of our local cultures. More importantly, we stand to lose jobs. Inspired by his father, Akin has been into politics since he was a kid and initially went to law school before realizing he wanted to be a chef. He enrolled in the prestigious L'Académie de Cuisine in Washington. So what do we have? We've got gnocchi Parisienne, French-style gnocchi, no potato involved, jumbo lump crab from the Chesapeake, and then we gild the lily a little bit with some caviar.
That sounds amazing. And then there's cake.
French apple cider cake. We make it with like a farmhouse, Northern French, alcoholic cider, a Calvados creme anglaise, and then if Calvados caramel pecans on there.
Akin has worked in renowned kitchens inspired by Mediterranean and Thai flavors, like Comey and Little Saro in D.C., and by Israel, like Zahav in Philadelphia. How do you get from all that to a French brasserie?
My dad's side is very French. I wanted to find new ways to approach this cuisine that drew from my own personal history. I do try to draw influences from all those stops I've made along the way.
Take Le Cavalier's grilled swordfish, which is served with whipped feta, and a tzatziki made with butternut squash.
The whipped feta is something that, you know, is a Comey thing for sure. Doing something like putting squash in the tzatziki is something that, like, reminds me of a lot of the stuff we did at Zahav. It was often taking a traditional thing like tzatziki and like doing it a little differently.
He's also updated the historic space.
All these memories in this restaurant, we needed to honor people who've gotten engaged here, celebrated anniversaries, birthdays. It was like a balancing act between updating it, making it commercially viable, but also preserving the integrity of the restaurant, keeping it recognizable.
Built in 1913, the Hotel Dupont has hosted presidents, movie stars, and world leaders. Co-owner Rob Buccini and his firm bought the property in 2013 from the Dupont Chemical Company. It's been the anchor of a nearly $2 billion redevelopment of downtown and of Joe Biden's political life.
But you don't think of yourself as anything other than the store when you come in here. It's been, you know, part of Delaware history and obviously part of the Biden history as well.
For a lot of people, it is the Hotel Dupont, but it's also the Biden Hotel. It's that place where he always seems to do big things.
Yes.
In 1972, then 29-year-old Joe Biden celebrated his first Senate election night victory there. More recently, the ballrooms were settings for speeches and campaign-produced videos. Buccini is hoping that the hotel's presidential connection helps once the pandemic ends.
We think that the Biden effect will be significant, that people will come to visit Wilmington, find out how great a place it is.
The newly reopened restaurant has yet to get a visit from Wilmington's most famous resident, thanks to the pandemic. Has he been here yet?
We expect to see him.
But you hold the table for him.
Absolutely.
Yum. We wish you brought the cake.
I know.
So you take the Acela down to Wilmington. I'll take the Acela up from D.C. We'll meet there,
we'll have
and it's
cake.
on me, right? We'll have the cake.
Great
By the
job.
way, real quick, have you ever had street closures for your dish?
No.
We had the street closed so that we could do that outside. So special thanks to the Wilmington Police Department for helping us out with that.